I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is James Corbett, publisher of the CorbettReport.com and editorial writer for the International Forecaster. He's speaking to us from Japan. Welcome back to the show, James.
Thanks for having me on. Always a pleasure to be here.
Were people glued to their TV sets in Japan wondering what would happen with the U.S. election?
I'm not sure about everybody, but it certainly was news here. And I was even out and about doing some shopping yesterday, and the stores that I was in had it on the TV with the Japanese commentary. So it certainly is a worldwide event. People are watching. And because, obviously, we are living in the time of the worldwide American empire, and what happens in the United States is felt everywhere around the world, and even more so in close U.S. allies like Japan. So I think everyone's quite interested in what's happening.
What was the reaction to the election of Trump?
I think, like probably most of the rest of the world, shock, surprise, and worry, I think, is one of the key words. For example, the Japan Times is reporting up. They did a little man-on-the-street type interview with some people around Tokyo, and that was the prevailing sentiment. People are concerned. They're worried about it. And I think that's somewhat ironic because the Japanese political mindset is fairly conservative, and I mean that in the sense that they have very old school views about gender relations and things like that, to the point where any faux shock or surprise about the types of things that Trump said on the campaign trail probably would be a bit hypocritical and ironic coming from Japanese who have supported politicians who say all sorts of things like that on a routine basis. I think the real concern here is more about the uncertainty with regards to what will happen to the U.S. policy in the Asia-Pacific, and how will this change the military arrangement and agreement, and potentially even economic arrangements like the TPP. So on the official diplomatic side, we had Abe coming out, Prime Minister Abe here in Japan, coming out and saying, "I express my heartfelt congratulations on your election as the next president of the United States to Mr. Trump. And the stability of the Asia-Pacific region, which is the driving force of the global economy, brings peace and prosperity to the United States, and we are unshakable allies," and that sort of stuff. And then in reciprocation, the U.S. State Department, via Department mouthpiece Mark Toner, has said, we are reassuring the Japanese people that the relationship is core foreign policy interest to the U.S., and that relationship is going to remain regardless of administration. So there's been the type of, political back and forth that you would expect, although it is interesting to contrast that with the fact that back in September, Prime Minister Abe actually met on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly with Clinton to discuss how important it was that the U.S. ratify the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. So they were already conspiring and talking about that a couple of months ago, on the assumption, of course, that Secretary Clinton would be elected. That didn't happen, so it looks like those plans have not come to fruition. And that, I think, for certainly the immediate effect for Abe and his political aspirations is one of severe economic worry, because this really does throw a lot of questions and doubts on Abenomics generally, and the Japanese position in economically speaking, because we have yen hedging already at near record highs, and that is probably going to increase as people are at least concerned about what this might, a Trump presidency might mean for the dollar, and whether that's going to put downward pressure on the dollar. And if so, then more people are going to be hedging in yen. That's going to drive the yen up. That's going to make all of the Bank of Japan's ideas and the government of Japan's policies even more difficult to implement, like their 0% target for 10-year bonds. So there's a lot of economic worries that come with this, I think. And At this point, it's so up in the air. We really have no idea what ultimately policies are going to result from this, which is why I think we've seen the remarkable sell-off that was taking place during the election as the results were coming in, and then the remarkable rally that we saw in the U.S. stock market after everything was sorted out. I think what that ultimately means is the markets really don't know what's going on, and so they're dipping, and then people are buying the dips. And I think that's probably what we can expect until the Trump administration actually takes office and something tangible starts to result.
How did Asian currencies react to the election?
The yen did see a brief spike. It strengthened more than 3% during as the results were pouring in, but those gains were pared back. So again, I think like the rest of the world, there was that sell-off and spike, and I think we've seen that reciprocated with the yen, for example, strengthening, but then not strengthening so much. So again, I think a lot of this is just gut reactions and people trying to sell the change. But at this point, no one really knows how this is going to settle, whether this even will be ultimately a downward pressure on the dollar. And I think that's going to come down to such things as the Federal Reserve, of course, and whether they decide to hike rates. Sorry, that was a difficult phrase to say. And whether they decide to hike rates next month, as people were expecting would probably maybe happen, or whether they'll hold off on that, whether Trump will follow through on his promise to audit the Federal Reserve in the first 100 days and what that might do to decisions that the Board of Governors is making. There's so many things at play right now that I just don't think that we can look at what's happening in the first few hours of the news with anything approaching confidence about what that portends for the future.
Yes, and I know a lot of big banks are worried if they do audit the Federal Reserve because it'll reveal all of their secrets over the past 100 years.
Theoretically, I personally don't think that the audit will actually be that much of a game-changing thing because I don't think the public understands what they're even looking at there. There will be some hay made from it if they do, and hopefully it will get more people to look into the Federal Reserve System. I'm not sure. And plus all of that, the idea is, of course, that's all behind us now. That was 8 years ago. That was the Bush/Obama regimes. That has nothing to do with this new bright future that we're living in. So there is a sense in which the Fed might be able to escape culpability for its former actions if that does happen. But we'll have to see how that plays out. Certainly banks should be nervous at any rate for their names being spilled as being the ones with their hands at the discount window, because obviously that's always seen as a sign of weakness of banking institutions. And we might get a peek under the curtains at how poorly some of the U.S. banks really are performing, or kind of the way that they have absolutely been teetering and being propped up by Federal Reserve largesse. So we might get some indication of that if the audit goes ahead. We'll have to believe it when we see it, I suppose.
Many mainstream media outlets in the U.S. pretty well didn't keep it secret that they were anti-Trump, and now I'm hearing that perhaps he's going to start breaking up some of these giant media conglomerates where only 4 or 5 companies control most of the media in the U.S.
Well, once again, I will believe it when I see it. Who is saying this, and what knowledge are they acting from? Again, so much of this is just pure conjecture and has nothing to do with anything that's actually taking place. Now, there is certainly and to what extent could the president even affect such things without doing things that are unprecedented and unconstitutional? But there is, for example, pending mergers and acquisitions and things between corporate media conglomerates that may be scuttled at the federal level if they do come before a Trump administration. So those types of things might be happening. But again, I don't think we have any reason to know that with any certainty at this point. The proof, as always, will be in the pudding, and I think dissecting that before it happens might be a little bit presumptuous.
And of course, people in Asia are very worried about Trump's foreign policy because he said during the election, the defense partners of the U.S. should pay more of their fair share. And then he said, why don't we just give nukes to South Korea and Japan so they don't have to worry about China anymore?
This is I think probably the primary concern on the forefront of most people's minds in this region is, does this really mean a fundamental change in the U.S. security umbrella that has been placed over the Asia Pacific? Because that would obviously be a game changer of the sort that you don't see even every generation. I mean, it would change the game altogether from the entire post-World War II period. So if, for example, Japan is basically encouraged to start developing its own nuclear weapons, as Trump did at least intimate on the campaign trail, that would really transform the region and create, of course, an even bigger arms race than we're already seeing here in a region that's already on edge. Now, I imagine that some of those comments are going to be walked back fairly quickly as the briefings commence and the military-industrial establishment starts informing the Trump administration about how things really work. But, who knows? Again, let's not prejudge what's going to happen. But that is obviously, I think, the first and primary thing that's on the minds of a lot of people in this region who are quite worried about that possibility. Because, of course, Japan is at least nominally committed to being a non-nuclear nation. The three nuclear and non-nuclear principles, they won't not only develop them, but they won't even allow them to be, stored and or transported through their territory and all of that sort of stuff, which we now know is something of a lie because they've been illegally dealing with the U.S. for decades now in weapons-grade plutonium, which was exposed a couple of years ago and didn't get a lot of media attention, but is nonetheless shows that the Japanese government has been quite hypocritical on that issue. But still, at least amongst the general public, the idea is that Japan is a firmly committed non-nuclear nation. The idea that they would suddenly be in a position where they would be openly developing a nuclear weapons program would be, I think, very shocking and very worrying to a lot of people here who still believe in, at least in the rhetoric of a peaceful Japan.
Yes, and there's only one country in the world that's suffered atomic bomb attacks, and I don't think they want to perpetrate that.
You would think not. No, the average person, I think, certainly does not. And it is very, very, that is still something that is very much in the Japanese consciousness. And, from every perspective, school children learn about it. They take trips to Hiroshima. They make their 1,000 paper cranes in honor of Sadako, one of the children that died from radiation poisoning. That kind of thing is still very much in the forefront of the Japanese consciousness, generally speaking. So as much as Abe and his party has worked to sort of bring this nascent Japanese nationalism back to the fore and make it a more militaristic nation, it would be another order of magnitude altogether to get the Japanese public on board with nuclear weapons. So again, I think we'll have to cross that bridge if we come to it. I'm still quite incredulous that we are going to come to that bridge.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after the break.
Gem International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond producing country in Africa, located next to the fourth largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109 carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. Gem International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with James Corbett. James, what about the fact that it seems Vladimir Putin is happy that Trump won the U.S. election? Trump has said he'd rather negotiate than confront people. Does that give people any peace of mind, or is it something, again, that's in the unknown category?
Well, this is one of the fascinating things about this election cycle, for whatever else you might say about it. The idea that now we have the Democrats who are the most vociferous anti-Russian Cold War rhetoric type people lecturing us about the evils of even considering being friends with a nation like Russia. And we have the Republicans who are saying, what are you guys talking about? Take a chill pill. It's such an inversion of what we would expect from political reality, where even 4 years ago you had Romney saying that Russia was the biggest threat to the United States, and you had the Democrats laughing at him for that statement. Now suddenly Putin is the greatest threat to all of humanity, and the idea that you would not want to go to war with him is somehow unthinkable. We'll have to see how that sorts out, because again, what is said and what is thought and what is hyped and what is believed and what is put in the headlines during an election campaign is usually 180 degrees opposite to reality and to what people ultimately understand once the election is over. And we'll see both, whether Trump really is committed to forging some sort of relationship with Russia that is not about pointing guns at each other and threatening war, and whether the Democrats and the anti-Trumpers will come around to the fact that perhaps the idea of being more peaceful and cooperative with Russia rather than pointing guns at them and threatening war might actually be a good idea. I think both of those are possibilities on the table that we'll have to see, again, how it plays out. I hope I speak for most rational, level-headed, peace-loving people on the planet Earth that if there is a way for the two most armed super nuclear powers in the world to get along and not be on the brink of war in places like Syria, that would be a good thing. I can't imagine how anyone would think otherwise, but there's been a lot of indoctrination going on to try to make Putin and Russia seem like the arch-evil nemesis of the entire world, and that only leads to some very scary situations like we have seen in Syria, and the floating of the idea of the no-fly zone and other things, which really do threaten to bring the world to the brink of all-out warfare. I think it, hopefully, if nothing else, this might alleviate some of that pressure.
Trump, of course, in the election campaign also talked about we need to do something about the trade imbalance with China. What could he do, and what's the reaction in China?
Well, obviously, this is going to be one of the huge cruxes of the entire economic plan, and for its part, the markets have reacted with obviously industrial stocks jumping on the basis of the idea that somehow he is going to be able to affect a resurgence of nascent American manufacturing and follow through with the penalization that he's talked about. For example, American companies moving overseas and exporting to America is going to add a tariff, a surcharge on top of those goods. So markets are probably starting to price in the fact that maybe some of this might actually happen. And if so, how does that affect the relationship with China? Obviously, I think China is worried about what this could portend, because as much as they have been trying and really economically speaking need to wean themselves off of being an export-based economy that needs to export cheap plastic goods to the United States in order to maintain its economy, they have been unsuccessful in actually weaning themselves off that system, and they still very much need the American trading relationship. So I think to a certain extent, I mean, from the 2D geopolitical chessboard maneuvering perspective, the United States does have still an awful lot of leverage over China and can certainly put some pressure on to make some of the firms that are now situating and relocating and using China as a manufacturing base, put some pressure on them. To what extent that will play out, I hate to sound like a broken record, but we're going to have to wait and see, because again, so much of the rhetoric that we've heard on the campaign trail is rhetoric, and it's all about the details, what will actually happen and what policies can be enacted, let alone what policies will be enacted. So again, I think we'll have to wait to see what specifically the policy proposals are, but certainly China has to see that the Chinese-U.S. trading relationship is, if not in the crosshairs, at least comes into question in some serious ways.
What about his victory speech? It was very calm, very level. He congratulated Hillary on a good fight, a hard fight, a noble fight, thanked her for the work that she's done for the U.S. government as Secretary of State, things that you didn't expect him to say. Is this more of what we might see of a President Trump rather than campaigner Trump?
I very much expect that that's the case, and I very much expect that almost no one is seeing this, but I very much expect that Trump is going to act like the Democrat that he has been most of his life. Only Nixon could go to China, and only Trump can govern like a Democrat. I think he might be more successful in leading a more Democrat-style agenda than Obama could have been. Which is going to blow people's minds. I really do suspect that that's the case. And the first indication of that, as you say, some of the first words out of his mouth, and after having listened to supporters on the campaign trail cheering "lock her up" at every campaign rally, and him encouraging it, the first words out of his mouth, "Let's thank Senator Clinton for her service to the country. She's worked hard and fought hard and waged a great campaign." That's, I think, in every sense, what we're going to start seeing. Suddenly, the wall is not going to be built with Mexican funds and all of these other things that were floated. And I think we're going to see a lot more. I imagine things like Obamacare probably will be repealed, but it will probably be replaced with Trumpcare. He has stated over and over and over, including on the campaign trail, that he's in favor of universal health care. It's just the way Obama did it wasn't right. Same thing with immigration. It's not that he's going to round up all the illegal immigrants tomorrow and ship them all out of the country. He's going to continue what Obama is doing, but do it more vigorously, as he said during the general election. So, I mean, it's just, I think people are going to be surprised, but people have painted themselves largely into a corner so much, putting their identity in being anti-Trump or pro-Trump, that you're going to have the Democrats in an awkward position of opposing some of the policies that they would probably actually support if it was coming from a Democrat, and Republicans doing the opposite. Again, there's so much political inversion happening here. It's going to be interesting to see the pretzel knots that people will twist themselves into. But I think you're right. I think the tone that we heard in that victory speech is going to be much more like the tone that we're going to hear from President Trump.
James, thank you so much for your report from Japan.
Thank you for having me on.
My guest has been James Corbett, publisher of thecorbettreport.com and editorial writer for the International Forecaster. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Questions for the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.